In this video we shall continue reviewing ways of requirements gathering. The previous video was dedicated to these techniques, and now we are focusing on these ones. So the next one here is prototyping. I hope you still remember when we were talking about interviews. We said that sometimes for some reasons we need to look at something real, because it's much easier to discuss something that you see or even may take and feel in your hands. It's much easier than discussing something imaginary. So prototypes in software testing always come in two ways. The first one, it's the source of the new information. And the second one, it's something real, some material thing to discuss. Because of course when we look at something, when we discuss that something, we may come to some good conclusions, to some new good ideas, thoughts. So these two ways are always part of any prototyping. What are the pros and cons here? Obvious thing is that most of people prefer to see the object in discussion, not only to imagine it. So once we see something real, it's easier to discuss it. And the second obvious idea is that no matter how detailed, how specified a description is, a real object is always better. It provides us with more data. Still, we have the cons. Prototyping takes time, sometimes a lot of time. So that's why we usually try to not only make prototypes as is, but to use them in a kind of agile approach, in spiral approach. When we work on some project and we repeat some activities again and again, each time at the end of the cycle we have something valuable, something deliverable to show to the customer, to discuss with the customer. And then we use that valuable something for a new cycle. That's why we don't need to throw the work away. But of course, sometimes some work may be discarded. That's not great, but that's okay, because we discard a little of work, only some part of it. So the more often we come to such discussions, the more often we show something to the customer, to clients, the less work we have to discard later. And as the continuation of that idea, it's usually good to know when to stop in order not to make too much work that in some time will be discarded. So we may create something small, show it to a client, discuss it, and then somehow rework it. It's better than creating something big and understand later that something went wrong and that we have to throw away half of that something big and to rework it from the very beginning. Modeling is really similar to prototyping. But unlike with prototypes, models are not usually something physical. They are more often something mathematical, something computational. So it requires formulas, numbers, some special tools, and so on. But it also can create something that we may see, discuss, and then somehow rework, reshape into something more useful. So the pros here are the following. Models make a lot of difficult things easy. Imagine there is a physical process, or there is some sophisticated algorithm or something like that. But with modeling, we may see some chart, some diagram, some numbers, and so on. And we understand the complex idea in a simple way. Models show us hidden properties, especially like in real life when we talk about, for instance, modeling of an engine for an airplane or modeling a building. We may see that something may break under some circumstances. We may see some weaknesses. We may even see some advantages of one or another decision. And with modeling, as long as it's not physical, it's a mathematical, computational one, it's easy to analyze, to compare several ideas and to see if some ideas are possible or not, or to compare some ideas to see which idea is better. In modeling, we may simply adjust some input parameters, some input data, and see the outcome. It's easy, it's cheap, it's fast. Still, there are cons. Modeling requires experience, knowledge, and tools. We need special tools for mathematical, computational modeling, and so on. Modeling is extremely difficult without tools, and sometimes those tools are not easy to build or not cheap to buy. Improper model may give us poor data if we use invalid formulas, bad computational approach, and so on. Our model may show us something wrong. It's a huge risk, and the only way to eliminate this risk is to go to the experts, professionals, to compare data from several models and so on. There are ways to deal with this risk, but this risk is really huge. And models sometimes are harder to understand than prototypes, especially if our tools are imperfect ones. Because with prototypes we see something real, something that we may interact with. With modeling, it's more like a mathematical, abstract idea. Of course, it comes with some visual aids, with some simplifications and so on, but it is still more difficult to understand than the prototypes. Documentation analysis not only allows us to find issues with some existing project documentation, but it allows us to get extra information, because we may and we must read not only something about a project, but something that is outside our project, like industrial standards, some manuals, books, best practices, articles, and so on and so on. There is a lot of something to read, something proved well-known good. So when we read these books, some documentation, when we analyze all these articles, compare data, combine data we get from that sources, we not only acquire knowledge, but we acquire some useful data to make our own documentation and our project requirements better. The pros here: no special actions, no special tools, and so on. We just sit and read a document at any free time we have, anyhow, anywhere we like. It also makes us better professionals, and it helps us improve existing documentation. But that new data raises new questions. So we have to write down them for further discussion, and sometimes we have to look for the answers ourselves. Of course, new questions are good, but new questions require more time to find the answers for. And so that's the disadvantage here: time consumption. And there is another risk. Working alone increases the probability that we miss something or create some defect in our documentation, because here we work alone. We do not have a backup like our colleague, like some opinion from another specialist, another expert. So that's the risk we should take into account. Still, this risk is not so huge because the result of our work always may be reviewed, and so we create something, we read a book, standard or something like that, we write another part of requirements, and then we show that part to our colleagues, to the customer, get the feedback and see if we were right or if we missed something. Working with focus groups really has a lot in common with questioning, but here we usually involve face-to-face communication. We gather some people, we discuss something with them, we involve them into some interaction, and we see the reaction. We receive the feedback, and then we use this feedback as a source of information to make our documentation and requirements better. The pros here are the following. Now we can gather a lot of information from real end users, and as long as we usually carefully collect those focus groups, these are real end users, not some random people on the internet answering our questionnaires. Unlike with questionnaires, this activity creates a deeper involvement because it's usually in-person communication, and so people are right here. They pay 100% of their attention to what's happening, and we may discuss something right here and see the real reaction. Another pro here is that we may not only gather information, but influence the opinion, because with questioning we only ask. Here we may explain. For instance, some people say, "Wow, we do not want that button to be green. We want the button to be red." But then we may explain that for some really good reason, in this particular case, a green button is better. And those people hear us, think it over, and say, "Okay, now we see, yes, green is better, we agree with this." And they then will share this word. They will influence other people and say that green button is better. And other people will also understand and agree on that. That's almost impossible with questioning, but it's really possible with focus groups. And the cons here are the following. It's difficult, really difficult to gather proper focus group. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So we need experienced professionals to organize the process. Because like any other technique, if used improperly, this technique will give us invalid data. And some legal questions here. Something like non-disclosure agreement or anything like that should be taken into account here. Because these focus groups will get access to some information that may be not yet public. So we have to absolutely think about it, remember about it, and ask legal specialists to create some papers and ask the people from focus groups to sign these papers in order to avoid problems in the future. And the last technique here, self-writing, or usually rewriting. It's really not for gathering the information, but to formalizing ideas, because from all those previous techniques, like interview or meetings or prototyping or something like that, we get information in different ways. And then we should somehow write it and make a good document. that's easy to understand, that follows special format, special template, and so on. So the main pro here is that while each and every technique provides us with some information that has to be reworked and reformatted, here this process is held. Here we get these nice, well-formed documents. But we have to remember that sometimes it's really difficult to stop your own ideas and to avoid adding these own ideas, your own thoughts into requirements. So to avoid such situation, we absolutely have to get the feedback from the customer, because what we are creating here, it's only our idea. It's not really the final idea. Final idea, final approval always comes from the customer.